It's amazing to be here today, everyone, talking about my favorite topic, risk governance and control in a rapidly changing world. I'm, Darren says, a co-author of Sooner, Safer, Happier, which is a book published 2 years ago documenting patterns and anti-patterns for business agility. I've spent most of my career in financial services. As a practitioner, I enable cultural change and I lead on ways of working. And so where we're going to start with today is the why. We'll look at the polls in a moment. And why is it necessary to reimagine risk and control? And I ask this question because for some folk who I work with, it's really not obvious at all. But the answer lies in the second half of the heading of this talk, which is in the rapidly changing world. So at the world of work is changing. We've come from an age of mass production. 100 years ago, people were cogs inside factory systems. Their products were known, and their goal was to minimize variability. The work they did was predictable, and the risks were predictable. This was the era of Taylorism and scientific management. It was time and motion studies. It's when the Gantt chart was invented, a hugely effective tool for its time, still in use in many organizations today, but this is not the world that most of us are in today. We're now in the age of digital, and we've been there for some time now. The work that many of us do is unique and it's unknowable. Product and process innovation is continuous, change is continuous, and it's not stop-start like it used to be. With this, the risks are emergent, and the shift has a huge implication on the strategies we need to apply for managing risk. Continuous integration requires continuous risk management. So I'm going to talk through some of the patterns and anti-patterns for improved risk and control. They've been established at scale within a regulated context over a number of years. An anti-pattern is a challenge that creates a headwind, makes it harder, increases your risk. A pattern is an opportunity to create a tailwind and to reduce your risk. So these are based on lessons learned. Darren, can I see the poll results now?
Yes, they should be in the polls, but if you don't see them, I can quickly walk you through them. With most people in the first question coming from a government's risk or compliance role, we have very little from change delivery or client facing. So most people are governance. If you want the results for the second poll, we have quite a mix of fairly even votes for everyone except E, which is we have modernized our governance and it works great. That doesn't have a single vote yet, which doesn't bode well, I would say. And from the third poll, it's fairly evenly divided between people wanting to improve the safety of their DevOps and people wanting to know how to measure safer and increase transparency.
So thank you. So for those of you, so welcome everyone. Those of you who are experiencing strong traditional stage gate governance, the CIO who said to me, well, when our agile teams hit the control gates, they all slow down to the same speed as everyone else. You may know what that CIO was talking about. And for those of you who got rid of governance during your agile transformation, I've been there, I understand it, I know organizations that have done that. It's a mistake. It can happen with positive intent. The automation of governance is amazing. We love to see automation wherever possible. However, you can only automate what you know about. In a predictable world, if you knew what all the risks were, then sure, you could automate everything. In an emergent world that I've just been describing, that gets more challenging. And for those of you who are finding ways to improve, but it's still a not bottleneck, fantastic, keep going. So you're the stories of the future, the case studies at this conference of the future. And I'd love to meet the person who's already modernized and is working great. I look forward to some good chats about that. One person there, I just have to make me laugh. It's not safe for me to say what I really think. We've looked at the existing governance and control framework in an organization. Actually, there is, and it can be unhelpful for anyone to really know how unhealthy it is. So you can't say what you really think, just have to focus on improving it and making it better. So thanks for sharing that. In terms of the why you're here, we'll try and make sure I cover those and leave 10 minutes at the end for any questions and answers. So getting into the anti-patterns, then we'll start with the anti-patterns and then move on to the patterns. So the anti-patterns being challenges that can create a headwind. And the first anti-pattern is a lack of safety, by which I mean psychological, in the domain of safety. In other words, the domain of risk and control. So lack of safety within safety. What on earth do I mean by that? Well, some of you may recognize this image from 10 years ago. It's what you don't want to happen in your organization. On the day this rig exploded, this was Deepwater Horizon, by the way, executives from Transocean were on the rig celebrating 7 years without incidents. So was this a safe rig? Or was it actually 7 years of bad news being buried because people did not feel safe to report issues and therefore cause delays? And that lack of reporting of issues, that lack of safety, led to systemic weaknesses building up, maybe, so that the accident, when it happened, was far worse than it needed to be. The investigation concluded the latter. And this is a pattern that occurs across industries. It occurs time and again, whether you're a aircraft manufacturer with a grounded fleet of 737 Maxes for a period of time, whether you're a car company having regulatory issues due to defeat devices, or whether you are in any other industry where data leaks are the bills. In the age of digital, this risk is real across all industries. So the first message here is that culture matters. Process on its own doesn't keep you safe. And the compliance professional in financial services who said to me, well, when things go wrong around here, it's a witch hunt. You know, if that resonates with you, if you know what that means, there's a witch hunt when something goes wrong, then it's a warning sign. So culture matters first and foremost when trying to improve that culture. Anti-pattern 2 then is role-based safety. This is an initiative in your organization. It's a thing you're trying to achieve. And this is what some agile initiatives can look like. A Gantt chart with sprint written 10 times in the middle. Obviously, it's not the target state, but we see this in many organizations today where they're at. So work flows through a number of silos, many of which are GRC. You may have IT security, you may have data management and fraud and anti-money laundering and enterprise architecture and regulatory compliance, and the handoffs take time to navigate. So in one organization, I put a stopwatch on how long it takes to navigate the end-to-end risk and control process for a zero-risk Hello World application to move into production. And we got 3 months elapsed time, and that was including 20 days of project management effort to expedite all of those conversations to happen. So, so this slows you down. And furthermore, if your initiative is being planned up front today, with risks assessed at the point of knowing the least, and if the first learnings are when things actually go live, which may not be on a daily basis through the sprints, but it may be back-ended, then risk becomes back-ended. And you may either conclude you have to push into live with dispensations, or you may have to accept delays whilst rework happens. So role-based risk and control silos is an anti-pattern. It's very normal. It does slow you down, and it can increase the actual risk you experience in a production context. Anti-pattern 3, the last one, is mindset to risk. So a belief that risks and controls are predictable and they simply need to be executed. This is very prevalent. Folk I work with in the GRC domain, and obviously my first narrative starts to impact this. In a Taylorist world, 100 years ago, this used to be true. Risks were predictable because on your mass production line works, because everything's the same on the production is fine. emergent system where the risk is emergent, where no two lines of code are the same, it really isn't working so well. And so the assurance colleague who asked me, can I prove that this list of 342 controls have all been applied to this release? Well, that's a kind of maximum possible compliance approach. And if the focus on control, on executing control, misses the conversation on what's the risk of this thing happening. It's control without speed, and it's ignoring the whole risk landscape in the age of digital. So, for example, when teams are adopting public cloud, this is a new tech, and it raises new risks, and it eliminates some of the old risks. So you need more context sensitivity when having your control and risk conversation. What is the actual risk? What controls do I need to apply? Maybe I need to be innovating some new controls to address this here. So a fixed mindset to deploying controls can increase your risk levels as well as slowing you down. On the left, we have our well-intentioned and extremely respected and hardworking risk and control colleagues, but in the context they're at, they're pulling against the delivery of value in the organization, because risk is seen as an alternative to going fast. So they're creating friction. But on the right, we're seeing those same colleagues are now getting into the toboggan. They're working closely with the delivery team, and they're enabling speed by having strong control at team level. And let's look now at some of the patterns for how this can actually work. As I mentioned, this is primarily a cultural pivot. First and foremost, there needs to be psychological safety, a willingness to learn new ways of managing risk, new ways of collaborating, new accountabilities. Sidney Dekker is a professor of safety science at Griffith University in Australia, and he explained to the DevOps Enterprise Summit several years ago that the difference between things going wrong and things not going wrong is in the presence of a number of positives. So the ability of individuals to say stop without personal reprisal. The fact that past success is no longer taken as a guarantee that everything's okay. Can't rely on the past to keep you safe. That diversity of opinion is encouraged, that dissent is allowed, that it's okay. And that conversation around risk and control is kept alive. So the core pattern for successful risk and control improvement is to understand primarily this is a cultural change. The shift risk and control being outside of the team to being trusted partners inside of the team is going to need some coaching, it's going to need some support. Building that trust will take some time, and it is worth it, because you don't want to be an exploding oil rig. Pattern 2 then is about safety teams. We talked previously about the challenges of role-based risk and control silos. A safety team is a cross-functional, long-lived virtual team of risk and control colleagues. The exact colleagues in there will depend on your context. I've mentioned a few of the domains already: IT security, enterprise architecture, may have service transition, may include fraud, anti-money laundering, regulatory compliance, a number of different domains. It depends on your industry and your organization. But it's all of the teams, all of the skills needed to advise a value stream on the potential risks and the mitigations they might need to consider. Okay, so a virtual team. It's a long-lived team because the silos on the left are really Venn diagrams of overlapping specialisms. Data is not distinct from information security. There's no overlapping diagram there. Information security, enterprise architecture, they have similar concerns. There are these safety colleagues who are aligned to the same value stream can help each other understand where are the risks and where do we need to be focusing our help most, so they can help each other to be more effective. Team construct, everyone in the value stream knows the name of their supporting risk and control colleague. The risk and control colleague is empowered to take risk governance decisions for the value stream they're aligned, and they understand the risks and the controls at play here. So there isn't a long chain of command back that everyone has to defer approvals to somebody who has less information than themselves. So the safety governance decisions, and everyone in the value stream knows the names of the people in their safety team. Constructs, we can start to achieve a shared purpose. So instead of the kind of game of cat and mouse arising that can happen between the two different, with the value stream focusing on delivering value because they think that's their job, and the safety team focusing on avoiding all risk because they think that's their job. Actually, their job is to both ensure the safe delivery of value happens. So there's a shared purpose, there's shared accountability for that. It can be customer awareness, customer understanding, more context sensitivity about what's the real risk in this situation, where are the real risks, and we can start to improve learning. And this long-lived relationship between a safety team and their value stream allows learning over time. So instead of a very transactional ticket-based system, I'm doing a new thing, tell me the risks, 80% of that conversation has already happened previously because of the long-lived context that develops between the two teams. So for example, in my house, I know my insurer says to me, Myles, you have to have a 5-bar lock on the door, on the front door, and I do. However, I actually know how to break into that front door myself in about 10 minutes if I really, really have to. No one else would, but I do. So if I'm trying to improve the security of my house, I might want to, I in the value stream need to be able to talk in an open way and a safe way with my safety colleagues about where really should I be trying to focus. Is it really an upgrade to the 5-bar lock, or is it some other aspect of my front door? Okay, aligning the pieces, but on its own, it's not enough. Pattern 3 is a minimum viable control process. The process has to be viable because we have to have auditable records of risks being managed, and we need a source of safety metrics that are able to give leaders at any level the confidence the right things are happening. So we call this lean control. As I mentioned, this is operating at scale in a number of organizations. The way the process functions, we find works the pattern here for a process to function. Starts on the left with a funnel. This is a funnel of business outcomes. This is your portfolio. Okay, I'm talking quarterly chunks of change, meaningful chunks of business change that probably on a quarterly basis will get prioritized for action. As that prioritization happens, the product team can immediately start a conversation with their safety team. They can start this conversation before there is any elaboration of detailed requirements, before there is a detailed design. What there is a clear business intent. And based off that business intent, the conversation is, well, how frequently should we be talking with you, dear safety team? Because the safety teams are a limited, scarce resource in your organization, and they can't afford to be engaging on every outcome for every product team all the time. It's just not practical. So this is a triage, the first conversation where we say, how frequently, given this backlog of business ambition this quarter, how frequently should we be talking to you? Maybe not at all, maybe higher frequency in the early days, maybe some aspects, some people in the safety team, such as data privacy, and maybe no one else does. So how frequently do we need to be working with you? Key auditable data points. Have we actually engaged with our safety colleagues for the outcomes that are in flight? Because if you haven't, if 80% of your business outcomes that are in flight and the safety community has no knowledge about them, well, as a change leader, as a CIO, as a CEO, I might feel concerned about that. So does my safety organization have awareness of what's happening? And that awareness is captured by frequency of conversation. The conversation is informed by artifacts for every single quarterly thing, which is wasteful and it's unnecessary and would take too long. Product teams have a wiki, product teams have an evolutionary artifact. It could be a SharePoint, it could be different formats depending on your context, but let's call it a wiki for now. So this is where your evolutionary artifacts are. So what's the architecture of the product? What's the tech of the product? What's the data in the product? Who's the clients of the product? What's the roadmap of the product? So key data points which any safety conversation would need to be able to refer to when trying to have some initial triage conversation around, well, how frequently do we need to talk to you? Okay. So from a safety team point of view, there is another set of artifacts as well, and that is the risk catalog. So across the organization, typically find there's tens, hundreds of policies relating to all of the different domains. We talk operational risk domains that we're talking about here, and those policies are well and good, but one of the issues with them can be they're not written in a developer-friendly language. It may be completely unclear to people in the value stream what actual mitigations are needed or what acceptance criteria is needed should this risk be presenting itself. So a risk catalog is a translation of your policies into a set of risk stories, or let's call them risk story templates. And the risk story template describes, well, what's the risk, what might be appropriate mitigations, what kind of acceptance criteria are needing to be evidenced for this risk to be validated, and who do we feel needs to validate this risk in this particular context. You may have your risks being validated by the safety team. I'm IT security. I need this to come straight back to me to make sure it's been done all right. You may have a champion network, a much broader network of security champions, and maybe the safety team is delegating to them validation that this risk story is resolved to an okay quality, or it may be delegated to the product team because you know what, we haven't got capacity. So product owner, just make sure that this is what happens, please. So either way, you're setting out the risk story in terms of very clearly understood actions which need to be taken to enable this risk to be mitigated. Now, it's not always predictable, so if the mitigation conversation doesn't work for the product owner, that's a reason to be customizing this risk story at point of identifying it. So in this particular, maybe there's a risk of malware gets identified through the conversation. So the malware risk story template can be pulled through a conversation with the safety team and the product team. Which specific actions should we be applying in this case? Do we need to make any customization? Yes, great, thank you. Get it in the backlog. In the backlog, where work is visible as a type of work alongside user stories, and the product owner and team can sequence that at the right place in the iteration roadmap where the malware risk is actually going to present itself. So what we place before the risk presents itself, but it doesn't need to be much before. As soon as the work is done, as soon as the risk story is ready for closure, the validation can happen either with the safety team or a safety champion network, or with whoever is nominated. And the closeout of that risk story represents closeout of that risk. Mitigation's okay, we're happy, no more discussion needed. And providing this is part of the daily work of the teams, of the product teams, they're talking to the safety teams on whatever cadence they've agreed up front, then you have a healthy relationship between your safety team and your value stream. You're creating the exhaust from that daily work, the data points that evidences, yes, these conversations are happening, yes, risks are being mitigated, yes, we're all good. And so the actual release process can run on any cadence you like. You can be running on hourly, daily, monthly, whatever size of batch you want to run in your product space, absolutely releasing on that cadence. The only reason why your DevOps pipeline might block this and say no is if you have some one or more risk stories inside a release you're trying to put live and it's not been validated appropriately by whoever is nominated, or some other aspect of the release acceptance by the product owner can't be met. So release attestation is something which can be useful, or iteration attestation. Rules that are largely delegated would create a strong break that says this risk story has not been validated, you can't go live with whatever this release contains. So as I mentioned, the process is operational at scale as a model in slightly different variants in different places. It's always underpinned by a modern SDLC standard, and that contains around 20 different control points find are necessary to maintain smooth running of this kind of control points in your modern SDLC standard are the data sources for your safety metrics. From a tooling point of view, a number of data for this pattern to work. In many organizations, there's absolutely no connectivity between these domains today. So on the left-hand side, I talked about outcomes, quarterly slices of business value. Okay, so you have a portfolio backlog or some form of that. It might be a bunch of project plans, it might be an OKR system, it might be something else. So you have a system of portfolio outcomes, you have a GRC catalog, you have work that happens in Jira, you have continuous integration that happens on that work, there's scanning that happens, and there's some kind of ops deployment process. So you have different domains of data, but it's quite normal for me. Still, I see in organizations, if we speak to an IT operations capability, they'll say, yeah, ServiceNow contains everything. Everything's in ServiceNow, everything that goes into live. But what's actually in that change request ticket in ServiceNow has zero linkage back to the work that was in Jira. Okay, so creating connectivity is important. And if you don't have connectivity to what was in Jira, then you don't actually know what went live. You just have a ticket. In Jira, I see many organizations where the teams working in Jira have loads and loads of tickets. All their work is in Jira. Everything we do is there. But there is no traceability back to the outcomes and the OKRs that it relates to. No linkage back to strategy. No linkage back to the why. And if you don't have that linkage back to the business why this is happening, it makes it very hard for many. Why is this happening? Well, I don't really have the context. So you need that traceability end to end. What we see is a lightweight tooling layer, lightweight connectivity layer is necessary to enable the pattern of lean control to get working. I'm working with a number of clients right now using Power Apps and Appian to achieve this. We built it using other kinds of examples of the sort of safer metrics that you might want to be able to surface then in your dashboard, in your safety dashboard, once you're following this sort of model, might be, well, what's the percentage of business outcomes where the safety team has never been consulted? You know, is that above or below threshold? Am I happy? And that could be, that question might be asked at organizational level, it might be asked at value stream level, it might be asked at product level. Another example of a metric is, well, how many aged risk stories do we have? How many risk stories that have been agreed and identified between the safety team and the product team? How many of them are older than 90 days? They're stale. Why are they still there? You know, and that can be an indicator that the conversation maybe hasn't been as collaborative as it needed to be. There's the work is getting stuck. So that's a health warning if you have aged risk stories. And there is usually some kind of release compliance threshold as well that we can use based off the overall end-to-end process health. So what the percentage of releases which are considered compliant in this business's context. So some safer metrics using your tooling. So DevSecOps is not enough to stay safe. We need to be thinking about Biz, Sec, Dev, Sec, Ops, shifting left on the risk conversation and maintaining continuous compliance and continuous risk engagement throughout. So in summary, reimagining risk and control in a rapidly changing world means increasing psychological safety. It means organizing safety colleagues by value stream to increase the richness and the context of the conversation they can have, and to introduce some minimum viable process supported by some minimum viable tooling to ensure that the right conversations are happening and the right risks are being resolved. And finally, I said this isn't theoretical, so where to start? Well, start small, start now, learn fast. You'll need to be engaging leaders. It's fundamental, as always, a moment you get through where you have to have your chief controls officer or chief risk officer and your CIO as minimum both aligned about this is what we're trying to do here in principle. You'll start with one value stream, one safety. Focus on effective conversations actually happening. If they don't happen to start with, does need some coaching, that's okay. It gets better quite quickly. What I do start to see is colleague engagement goes up really quite rapidly once once the communication is working, and you get the delivery teams really starting to contribute and innovate around how the controls might be improved, what works better, because they start to understand why it matters the closer they get to the safety colleagues involved. And so run small, safe to learn experiments you can start with very basic tooling, start with Confluence, start with Excel, scale that as you need to. Great. So that concludes my session. Thank you for listening. I'd love to take some questions through the Q&A. I have not been watching this as we've gone along, so I'd invite anyone who has questions to pop them in. I've used the word GRC. Thank you, Klaus. Governance, risk and compliance. So I have tried to stay with the word risk and control. Sometimes I flipped into GRC, governance, risk and compliance, but I mean the same thing by both those. This is the domain of colleagues in an organization who are focused on ensuring that policy compliance is maintained. They may be writing the policies, security policies, fraud policies, whatever they are, and they have the best knowledge about them, and they're trying to ensure the safe operation of the organization.
Thanks for this. And we do have a couple of questions from the audience for you in the Q&A. So the first question we have would be, for the safety team not to become a bottleneck, what would the ratio between products being developed and safety team members be optimally?
So the right place to start is where you're at. So there isn't a right number, okay? When we introduce safety teams, when I've seen safety teams introduced, it's not a staffing issue. We're not hiring more people for this. This is taking whoever you have today and pivoting them into a more useful, enabling the organization, the product teams to stay safe. So you start with where you're at. And the ratio will be whatever the ratio is, but it's never one-to-one. So safety colleagues are always a scarce resource that allows them to maximize the contribution they can make and the support they can give. The number of folk you have in your organization today effectively reflects your current risk appetite. So if you have one safety colleague and 10,000 people, that is your current risk appetite. So focus, still do the process. You might network to give you some scale. That's a separate matter, how many safety colleagues you actually have and when you choose to expand your safety teams.
Thank you for that. And I think you may have inadvertently answered the other question too, which is, how do you manage risk when you don't really have a safety team due to lack of people or skills? Is there any way or any advice you have on how to start small?
So, I mean, if you really don't have anybody focused on safety, then yeah, you've got a pretty tough starting point to come from. I guess if you don't have anyone focused on safety, then you might not have any policies either. But if you do have policies, then you probably have people who write the policies. And starting small will be starting with that group of people. And there are a number. You can approach this differently. If you are comfortable for all of the risk management to be fully delegated into your value streams, then ask value streams to surface their own safety champions and construct the safety team within the value stream, staffed out by people who side of desk have some interest in these areas. So I've seen they can work. I certainly would not, in a regulated environment, delegate my risk management to a safety champion network, but they can have a really useful role to play, particularly when it comes to writing the risk catalog, i.e. translating policy into testable risk stories, albeit for a sort of a lower threshold of validation for some products which maybe aren't so business critical, validating that we're all good on these risks. So there's a great role that you can build around that champion network. There will be people in most organizations who have some focus on risk. So, it doesn't need to be a lot, but what we're inviting here is a smarter way of applying that help, as opposed to a stage gate process, which doesn't actually work very well.
Hi, we're from Effico, the proud organizer of the DevOps conference.
Our goal is to uncover cutting-edge talks, emerging ideas, and DevOps trends, providing a global forum for practitioners and decision-makers to learn and grow.
We would love to also explore how we can help you excel in DevOps together. Visit us at effico.com and enjoy the inspiring talks at the DevOps conference.